It started with a knock and a lie. Not just any knock. The kind that comes with a certain rhythm, a little too confident, a little too entitled. I opened the door and there she was. Karen. Not just any Karen, but the HOA Karen. Sunglasses perched like a crown on her forehead, clutching a clipboard like it was the HOA Constitution, lips pursed so tightly I thought they might cramp. She smiled like she'd just claimed new land. Without waiting for an invitation, she said, "Congratulations, your backyard barbecue has officially been opened to the neighborhood." I blinked. Was she joking? No. She handed me a flyer I'd never seen before. A flyer she apparently made and distributed without my consent. I scanned it once and then twice just to be sure. Free community barbecue at 426 West Cedar Street, all neighbors welcome, courtesy of your generous host. I looked up. I am the host. And I never said that. She gave a little shrug like the matter was settled. The HOA newsletter announced it already, she said. Which was news to me, and apparently, to the actual HOA president when I called him 5 minutes later. But none of that mattered now. Because in Karen's mind, her lie had already become reality. See, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a strategic ambush. A hostile takeover of my smoker and my Saturday. I'd spent weeks prepping for this barbecue. Marinated brisket, ribeye steaks, handcrafted sauces with secret ingredient. My cousins were driving in. It was a private get-together. But Karen, somehow, decided that my backyard and my food were now community property. She didn't ask. She declared. And then she informed the entire neighborhood with banners near the mailbox, social media posts, and even a group text chain I wasn't on. The audacity would have been laughable if it wasn't so real. That's when something in me snapped. She wanted to turn my carefully planned barbecue into a HOA-wide festival without asking. Fine. Let's give her one to remember. I drove straight to the wholesale market, skipped the meat section, and went straight to the produce dock. Onions. Loads of them. White onions. Yellow onions. Sweet Maui onions. Red Spanish onions. 300 pounds of them. I bought crates. Stacked them to the ceiling in my truck. The guy ringing me up asked if I was running a soup kitchen. I told him it was for a very personal event. Back home, I fired up the smoker. No brisket. No ribs. Just onions. I chopped. I peeled. I skewered. I grilled. I smoked. I roasted. My backyard began to smell like the gates of a French onion apocalypse. By the time the first wave of neighbors arrived, the place looked festive. Tables were out. Chairs arranged. A banner fluttered on the fence. Welcome to Karen's Community Barbecue. The first arrivals walked in smiling, plates in hand, chatting about the food they expected. Ribs, burgers, grilled chicken. Some even brought side dishes to share. But as they got closer, their smiles froze. There was no meat. No sizzle of sausages. No juicy smoke of barbecue glaze. Just onions. Mountains of them. Some charred to a crisp. Some slowly caramelizing. Some skewered like kebabs. The air was thick. It stung the eyes. People started tearing up, literally. One lady asked if the grill was still warming up. I told her this was it. 300 onions. Cooked in 15 different ways. Karen's special request. They laughed nervously, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. Karen showed up 15 minutes later in a wide-brimmed sun hat and floral dress, probably expecting a grand entrance. She stopped dead when she saw what I'd done. The smile disappeared. Her nose twitched. She stepped forward, tripped on a crate of shallots, and caught herself on the patio table. The whole neighborhood was now watching her. She tried to spin it, claimed the meat delivery must have been delayed, that I must be doing some kind of slow-cook method. I didn't say a word. I just pulled out another tray of grilled onions and set it on the serving table. Kids were crying. Dads were confused. Moms were texting. And Karen was fuming. She pulled me aside, her voice low but furious. "You've made a fool out of me," she hissed. I told her she did that all on her own. She demanded I fix it. That I order food. That I apologize. I pointed to the sign again. Karen's barbecue. Her words, not mine. She stormed off, heels stabbing into the grass like she was trying to punish the earth. Meanwhile, I handed out onion rings on skewers like party favors. One guy asked if this was a new low-carb diet experiment. I said it was a revenge recipe. By sundown, the crowd had thinned. The smell hung in the air like a fog. People left with swollen eyes and questions they didn't want answers to. A few neighbors actually stayed, partly in solidarity, partly out of morbid curiosity. I set out iced tea and played music. We sat around and laughed. One guy brought out a bottle of whiskey and made toasts to the most unforgettable barbecue ever. I raised my glass and said, "Here's to Karen, for giving me the best reason ever to waste 300 onions." But the best part wasn't just the chaos. It was that someone had invited the local newspaper. Karen must have contacted them to cover her little PR stunt. The reporter showed up right when the last of the grilled onions were being served. I gave him a full rundown, told him everything, showed him the flyers, let him talk to guests. Karen tried to interrupt the interview, claiming it was all a smear campaign, but the journalist looked at her like she'd lost her mind. By the time he left, his notepad smelled like onions and he had more than enough for a juicy headline. That night, my cousin pulled up in his RV, stepped out, took one sniff, and said, "What in God's name happened here?" I said. "You ever heard of onion-based warfare?" He nodded slowly and said, "I'm in." We sat under the stars that night, beer in hand, fire pit crackling. The air finally started to clear. But my plan wasn't over. Because what Karen didn't know was that this barbecue stunt had just peeled the first layer. Underneath it was something bigger. And soon, the whole HOA would be crying. Just like her. By the next morning, word of the onion barbecue had spread like wildfire. I wasn't even out of bed before I got 3 text messages from neighbors I barely knew, one from an HOA board member, and a missed call from someone labeled "Reporter a Daily Scoop" in my call log. Apparently, Karen's little spectacle had not only turned heads but watered eyes across the community and beyond. Memes had started popping up. Someone had taken a photo of Karen mid-sneeze, red-eyed, trying to wave away onion smoke, and turned it into a poster that read "Karen's Tears," now available in bulk. Another had dubbed it "The Great Barbecue Cryout." My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, but I didn't mind. I had planned for impact, and it had landed perfectly. When I stepped outside to grab the paper, my yard still smelled like a sautéed mess hall. The grass seemed to sweat onion oil. Empty crates littered the side of the porch, and a few grilled rings were still clinging to the edge of the smoker, stubborn as ever. But there was also something new. A folded flyer taped to my mailbox. It was from Karen. Community Follow-Up Barbecue, hosted by HOA, real food this time. The nerve. Not only had she refused to apologize or admit wrongdoing, now she was trying to rebrand the disaster as a success and hijack the momentum. She'd scheduled a new barbecue at the community center in 2 days and put her name on the bottom like some kind of savior. It was clear she wasn't just trying to salvage her reputation, she was trying to erase me from the story. Fine. If she wanted to double down, I'd meet her at the bottom. That afternoon, I stopped by the HOA office to speak with one of the board members. Mr. Thompson, a retired judge with a skeptical brow and an allergy to drama, greeted me with a sigh and a mug that read, HOA, Hurting Angry Adults. He already knew what I was there for. He told me they'd received more complaints in one night than they had in the past 6 months. Most of them about misleading communication, misuse of HOA authority, and Karen's unauthorized actions. But he also told me that the board couldn't act immediately without a formal hearing. Bureaucracy, as always, moves slower than a sloth on vacation. Still, he encouraged me to write a statement. I did. And I added photo evidence, a timeline of events, and copies of Karen's messages that multiple neighbors had forwarded me. It was a thick file. When I handed it over, Mr. Thompson raised his eyebrows and said, "You sure you're not a lawyer?" I told him, No, but I've got enough onions left to make someone confess to anything. The next day, I went to the community center to scope out Karen's prep. She was there already, walking around like a cruise ship director. Folding chairs were being set up, tables were covered in plastic checkered cloths, and she was barking orders at 2 high school volunteers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. When she saw me, her expression tightened like someone had hit her with lemon juice. I walked up, casually chewing an apple, and said, "Nice turnout. Need any onions?" She didn't laugh. She said I was not allowed within 50 feet of her event and threatened to report me for harassment. I laughed and said, "You do remember this is public HOA property, right? Or do you make those rules up too?" That got her to flinch, just slightly. The power shift was already starting. But my favorite part of the day came when a food delivery truck pulled up and Karen rushed over to the driver. From across the lot, I could hear the conversation. The driver looked confused, checked a clipboard, and told her he had a delivery scheduled for the previous day at the Cedar Street BBQ event. Karen's voice cracked. She said, No, that's been rescheduled. It's today." The driver shook his head. "I already delivered that. Big guy with a beard signed for it. Said you canceled the order." That big guy was me. She didn't know that I had intercepted the catering truck the day before, right after the newspaper left. All I had to do was show them the fake flyer and say the original event was a prank. I sent the meat to a local shelter and told the driver I'd handle the tip. The shelter emailed me a thank you that morning with photos of smiling families eating ribs. I smiled again just thinking about it. Karen's barbecue turned out to be a disaster. Half the food was missing, volunteers started bailing, and the grill master, who turned out to be Karen's brother-in-law, accidentally set off the sprinkler system while trying to light a propane burner. The burgers were soggy, the buns fell apart, and a kid tripped on an unplugged extension cord, sending a table full of condiments flying like condiment fireworks. I stayed for exactly 10 minutes, just long enough to see the mess unfold. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Everyone could see it. Karma had RSVP'd and brought a +1. Later that night, I received a group message from one of the more neutral neighbors. It read, "Anyone else think Karen should take a break from event planning?" The responses flooded in. Thumbs up. Clapping emojis. A string of onion gifs. Someone even posted a picture of their eyes teared up next to a bowl of guacamole with the caption, "Still recovering." Karen, to no one's surprise, had gone quiet on the chat. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, a reporter showed up at my door. Not the same one from the local paper, a different one. She said she was writing a follow-up for an online column that tracked neighborhood dispute. Apparently, the onion barbecue had gone viral on Reddit, and the story was making waves. She asked for an interview. I agreed, as long as we could do it over breakfast and I could serve her onion omelets. She laughed and said, "That's a first for me." We sat down in the backyard and I walked her through everything, from the unauthorized flyer to Karen's meltdown to the charitable donation of the intercepted meat. She took notes. She asked sharp questions. And before she left, she asked if I had any final thoughts. I said, yeah. Don't mess with someone's grill. Especially when you're the one bringing gas to the fire. By the time evening rolled around, the neighborhood group chat was lit up again. This time, with links to the article. The title, "Man Grills 300 Onions to Smoke Out HOA Tyrant, Entire Neighborhood in Tears." The piece was funny, scathing, and surprisingly emotional. It painted a picture of a man pushed too far by authority and fighting back in the most unexpected way. Karen was livid. She posted a response in all caps, calling the article libel and claiming she was preparing legal action. But nobody bought it. Even her closest supporters had gone silent. One of them actually messaged me privately saying, "I never liked onions before. Now I love them." That night, as I sat outside on the patio with a cold drink and no agenda, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about one barbecue anymore. It had become a battle over space, respect, and boundaries. Karen had tried to take control of my home and my event like it was hers to command. But all she ended up doing was showing the entire community how not to lead. And as far as I was concerned, that meant the real grilling had just begun. It didn't take long for Karen to realize her grip on the neighborhood was slipping faster than she could slap together a cease and desist letter. But of course, slipping control wasn't the kind of thing Karen took lightly. She wasn't just irritated or embarrassed. She was furious, and she wanted revenge. Not just socially, but legally. I should have expected it when the envelope arrived by courier 2 days after the HOA meeting. Cream-colored paper, embossed logo, and a return address from a downtown law firm that definitely charged by the word. I opened it casually while sipping my coffee, half expecting it to be another threat disguised as an official warning. It was worse. Karen had filed a formal claim through a private attorney accusing me of defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and damages resulting from what she called my malicious public stunt with agricultural waste. In plain English, she was trying to sue me over onions. I laughed. Out loud. Not because it wasn't serious. It was. But because it was exactly the kind of dramatic nonsense she'd resort to. I scanned the letter, made some notes, then called my cousin Charlie. Charlie is an attorney. A good one. The kind of guy who once cross-examined a guy so hard the witness apologized mid-testimony for being born. Charlie was also there during the barbecue. He helped me marinate the onions in vinegar and garlic just to enhance the sting. When I told him Karen was suing me, there was a long pause. Then he said, "This is either the most desperate attempt to save face I've ever seen, or she's trying to cover something up." That got my attention. The next few days were a blur of legal prep. Charlie drafted a formal response, picked apart every ridiculous claim in her suit, and even included a counterclaim for harassment and abuse of HOA authority. I collected all the relevant evidence again, including the video footage of Karen planting flyers and lying to neighbors. Charlie was meticulous, and just when I thought this couldn't get more bizarre, I got an email from a local artist. Apparently, they'd seen the viral barbecue story online and wanted to contribute to what they called a symbol of resistance. What followed was a string of photos showing a life-size bust of Karen made entirely from dried onion peels. Red onions for the hair, yellow for the face, and shallots for the eyes. It was horrifying and brilliant. I asked if I could display it publicly. The artist said yes, but insisted on anonymity. So, I created an event. I called it the Onion Art Auction. It wasn't just a gag. I partnered with a local food bank and turned it into a real charity night. Artists donated pieces. Some made sculptures. One guy painted a portrait of Karen holding a flaming onion. Another made a diorama of the HOA barbecue with Karen photoshopped in the middle looking miserable. The story had become a rallying point for people fed up with HOA tyrants, and the event turned into a local happening. Flyers went up. People RSVP'd online. Even the mayor's office sent a message of support, which I printed out and framed. Karen, of course, found out. She tried to shut it down by filing a complaint with the city, claiming it violated community ordinances. The city clerk called me laughing and said, "We read the flyer. We're not shutting down an onion fundraiser. Tell Karen to take a walk." The night of the auction, the place was packed. Local news vans showed up again. Influencers posted clips. Neighbors brought food, drinks, and laughter. Even the people who had once sided with Karen came to see what the fuss was about. The Karen bust went for $750. A painting of her yelling near a smoke pit sold for $1,200. Altogether, we raised over $10,000 for the food bank. It wasn't just about the money. It was about unity. About showing that we wouldn't be bullied by HOA politics anymore. And then, right at the height of the night, something truly unexpected happened. A man in a dark suit showed up. Tall, serious, polite. Said he was from a federal agency and needed to speak with me about HOA financial practices. I blinked, thought it was a joke, but then he showed me his credentials. He wasn't kidding. Apparently, someone had anonymously submitted a report of financial mismanagement involving Karen's time as treasurer. The agency had been investigating embezzlement tied to community funds that went unaccounted for over the last 2 years. And the kicker? The BBQ debacle triggered renewed interest in the case because of how fast things escalated. They wanted statements, documents, and any financial trails we could provide. I gave them everything I had, plus pointed them to Mr. Thompson, the former judge on the board who had started compiling concerns on his own. Karen, unaware of what was coming, continued to act like she was untouchable. She doubled down on her legal threats, posted on community boards claiming she was the victim of a smear campaign, and even tried to get a restraining order against me for psychological harassment via food. It didn't go anywhere. The judge dismissed it immediately and told her, "Miss, this is a waste of court resources." But while she tried to fight shadows, the real storm was building quietly. The agency requested an audit of HOA funds during Karen's years on the board. When the preliminary results came back, it was bad. Thousands of dollars marked for landscaping, pool repairs, and community events were missing or had been redirected to suspicious vendors, including one that turned out to be a shell company connected to Karen's sister-in-law. The evidence began to pile up quickly. It wasn't just poor management. It was fraud. Real, prosecutable fraud. And once the federal team confirmed it, everything changed. A week later, Karen was called in for a special board meeting, and never came out the same. The HOA board removed her permanently, stripped her of voting rights, and handed the audit findings over to law enforcement. She left the clubhouse pale, lips pressed so tightly they disappeared into her face. She didn't speak to anyone. Didn't argue. It was as if she finally understood that this wasn't a game anymore. That her empire, built on rules and intimidation, had crumbled. 4 days, the neighborhood buzzed with updates. Some people were shocked. Most weren't. One guy joked that it was the first time anyone had ever seen Karen speechless. Others started suggesting new ideas for the HOA, real ideas like community gardens, shared events, rotating leadership. It was as if everyone had been holding their breath for years, and finally, they exhaled. That night, I stood in my backyard again, same spot where the great onion smoke once billowed. I looked around at the peace, the quiet hum of evening sprinklers, and felt something close to closure. What started as a petty prank had become a symbol of resistance, a ridiculous act of protest that peeled back the layers of power until the rot was exposed underneath. Karen wanted a public spectacle. She got one. But in trying to control the narrative, she ended up writing her own downfall. I didn't plan to become the guy who toppled the HOA tyrant. I just wanted a quiet weekend with my grill. But sometimes, justice doesn't come from courtrooms or speeches. Sometimes, it comes from a pile of 300 onions, sizzling in defiance, under the watchful eyes of neighbors who were tired of crying for the wrong reasons. And the best part? We weren't done yet. Because the final chapter of Karen's story was still being written, and the pen was now in our hands. It was a strange kind of peace that settled over the neighborhood after Karen's removal. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from release. Like a pressure valve had finally blown and the whole community was breathing again. People smiled more. Laughter carried farther across lawns. The passive-aggressive energy that once seeped from Karen's every porch-side inspection had vanished. And yet, no one was foolish enough to believe it was over. Not completely. People like Karen don't vanish quietly. They retreat, regroup, and wait for their next move. But what she didn't understand, what she never really could, was that the neighborhood had changed without her. We weren't just moving on. We were moving forward. 2 days after the special board hearing, a new vote was held to fill Karen's now vacant seat. For the first time in years, multiple residents volunteered, people who previously kept to themselves, unsure of how to deal with her iron rule. Diane, the board president, personally asked if I wanted to step up. I thanked her, But I said no. I told her I was better at flipping burgers than flipping policies. Still, I offered to help with outreach, cleanup events, anything the new board needed. Because even though I didn't want a title, I wanted to be part of the solution. Karen's absence had created more than a vacancy. It had created an opportunity to rebuild trust from the ground up. The audit findings continued to ripple outward. Karen was officially charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of funds. The community center had to be closed temporarily so investigators could go through years of financial record. Subpoenas were issued. Interviews were conducted. Every dollar she had touched during her time as treasurer was now under a microscope. The most shocking part? She hadn't just misused funds. She had funneled HOA money into vanity projects disguised as improvements. A new security system that never worked? It was installed by her nephew's unlicensed tech company. The pool fountain repair that never actually repaired anything? The invoice was forged. It became clearer by the day that Karen had treated the HOA like her personal piggy bank while barking about neighborhood standard. One afternoon, I got a call from one of the federal investigators. They wanted a statement from me, not just about the barbecue incident, but about Karen's long-term behavior. I told them everything I knew. They thanked me and said that without the onion barbecue going viral, none of this might have come to light. It was surreal. I had started by grilling onions out of spite, and now my name was listed in an official investigation report as the catalyst for community financial reform. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I just smoked another onion for good measure and called it even. Meanwhile, something incredible began happening online. The Onion Karen story had taken on a life of its own. Memes were one thing, but now local news stations across the country were doing segments on HOA abuse and homeowner pushback. I was invited to do a short video interview with a national morning show. They wanted to know how it felt to stand up to the neighborhood tyrant. I told them the truth. I didn't set out to be a hero. I set out to save a Saturday afternoon. But when someone pushes you into a corner, you either curl up or come out swinging. And in my case, I came out swinging with a basket of Vidalias. The fallout hit Karen hard. Not just legally, but personally. Her husband, who had always stayed in the background, quietly sold their second car. Then their camper. Rumors spread that they were preparing to move, hoping to get ahead of foreclosure now that Karen was liable for repaying the stolen funds. She filed an appeal, of course, claimed she was framed, that the invoices were altered without her knowledge. But her own email trail betrayed her. It wasn't just sloppy, it was arrogant. She never thought anyone would question her, never imagined her neighbors would rally together against her, and certainly never thought onions would undo her years of manipulation. The final blow came not in a courtroom, but in the park. The HOA held a reformation event there, free food, music, games for kids. Real community bonding. People brought dishes. Others brought folding chairs. I brought the smoker. Not for onions this time. For brisket. Real, tender, perfectly seasoned brisket. I had prepared it for days, marinated it overnight, smoked it slow. It was my way of saying thank you. Of closing the circle. No trick. No messages. Just food and fellowship. When I started carving it up, a line formed all the way to the tennis courts. People laughed and clapped and took photos with the smoker. A few even wore shirts that said Team Onion with little cartoon vegetables wielding fork. I should have been embarrassed. I wasn't. I was proud. At some point during the event, I noticed someone standing alone near the edge of the park. Karen. Dressed in dark glasses and a wide hat, watching from a distance. She didn't approach. Didn't speak. Just stood there for a moment like she was trying to decide whether to join or vanish. Then she turned and walked away. No one followed. No one called after her. For the first time, she had no clipboard, no platform, and no audience. Just the silence that follows when power evaporates and you're left with only your reflection. That night, after everything was packed up and the embers from the grill had gone cold, I sat on my porch with a cold drink and the kind of tired that only comes from deep satisfaction. I thought about how close I came to letting Karen ruin my weekend all those weeks ago. About how a single arrogant lie snowballed into public disgrace and federal charges. But more than that, I thought about the resilience of people when they finally decide they've had enough. The barbecue was never supposed to be a movement, but it became one. Not because I was loud or dramatic, but because I refused to let someone steal my peace without a fight. Neighbors still talk about it. Some joke that we should make Onion Day an annual tradition. Others say it taught them that rules only work if people agree to be ruled by them. That silence can be mistaken for consent until someone holds up a mirror. Me? I just smile and keep the grill clean. You never know when you'll need it again. Not for war. But maybe for a celebration. One where everyone is invited. Where laughter doesn't come at someone else's expense. Where justice tastes like mesquite, not bitterness. Karen's house went on the market 3 weeks later. The listing didn't mention the lawsuits or the memes, just the charming colonial with custom landscaping and community access. No one rushed to bid. Eventually, someone did buy it, a quiet couple from out of state. I met them during their first walk through the neighborhood. They asked if the area was peaceful. I told them the truth. It is now. And that's the end of it. Not with sirens or headlines. Not with one last argument. But with community. With laughter. With neighbors waving instead of hiding behind blinds. We're not perfect. But we're better. Stronger. And if another Karen ever rises again, well, let's just say I've still got the grill. And this time, I'll throw in a few leaks for good measure. By the time the sun rose the next day, it was clear the neighborhood had changed. Not visibly, not in the landscaping or the houses, but in the atmosphere. People waved more. Conversations happened in driveways and on porches. Someone even handed me a plate of brownies as thanks for taking one for the team. That wasn't just about onions. It was about exposing something that had long been simmering beneath the surface. Karen's grip on the HOA had always been tight. She'd made it her mission to monitor grass lengths, mailbox paint, and whether someone left their trash can out a minute too long. But now, after the onion saga, her power was slipping. She tried to act like she still had the same control, but every time she opened her mouth, someone in the background made a joke about tears or grilled shallot. And the best part was, she couldn't do anything about it without proving just how petty she really was. What none of us expected, though, was what would come next. On Monday, a flyer appeared taped to every mailbox and slid under doors. It was an official notice calling an emergency HOA meeting. The reason listed: addressing recent disruptions and violations of HOA standards. It didn't take a genius to figure out who called it. The meeting was set for Thursday at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. Karen's last stand, probably. But I wasn't worried. In fact, I had something planned of my own. Over the next few days, I collected evidence. Not just from the barbecue, but from other neighbors. Stories began trickling in about Karen overstepping her authority. One woman showed me a letter Karen had written threatening to fine her for having a non-compliant birdhouse. Another neighbor, an elderly man who walked with a cane, said Karen had scolded him publicly for not picking up a fallen palm frond fast enough. These weren't isolated incidents. They were patterns. Patterns of control, manipulation, and a complete disregard for what the HOA rules actually said. I gathered screenshots, letters, and testimonies. I made copies. A lot of copies. When Thursday night came, the clubhouse was packed. More than I'd ever seen for a meeting. Even the folding chairs had run out. People stood along the back wall, fanning themselves with their copies of the agenda. Karen stood at the front, flanked by 2 newer board members she'd pressured into running last season. She looked smug, like someone about to reclaim her throne. She opened the meeting with a thin smile and launched into a speech about community order, respect, and the importance of unity. Then she pivoted. She brought up the barbecue, claimed it was disruptive, said it had caused chaos and embarrassment to the HOA, that I had turned what should have been a generous event into a circus at her expense. And then, with a dramatic pause, she said she was filing an official complaint seeking disciplinary action. I didn't flinch. I stood up and walked to the front, holding my stack of evidence. I asked to respond. The room went quiet. Karen hesitated, then nodded. I began by recounting the facts, clearly and calmly. I explained that the original barbecue had been a private event and that Karen had taken it upon herself to advertise it as public without permission. I held up the flyer she had made and distributed. I showed the screenshots of her texts to neighbors inviting them to my open community barbecue. I explained how she misrepresented the event and caused confusion and frustration. Then I turned to the real reason we were there. I asked how many people in the room had received unfair warnings or threats from Karen over the past year. Slowly, hands began to rise. Then more. Almost half the room. I asked how many had felt afraid to speak up because they thought Karen would retaliate. More hands. I handed out the evidence packets and let them speak for themselves. The room buzzed as people flipped through them. Karen tried to interrupt, calling it hearsay and character assassination, but the president of the board, a quiet, level-headed woman named Diane, told her to let me finish. When I was done, Diane looked around the room and asked if anyone had something to say in Karen's defense. Silence. Then a voice from the back said, "I think she should resign." It was Mr. Everett, one of the most respected older residents, who rarely spoke at meetings. Another voice chimed in, seconding the motion. The room erupted into murmurs and nods. Karen looked stunned, like the floor had just dropped out beneath her. She tried to defend herself, saying she was only trying to maintain standards, but no one was buying it anymore. The board voted then and there to schedule a formal hearing on her behavior and put her privileges on hold pending the outcome. She was stripped of her role temporarily. Her name removed from the email list. Her access card for the pool committee deactivated. It wasn't total exile, but it was a clear step toward justice. When the meeting ended, people came up to me, clapping me on the back, shaking my hand, even offering me homemade jam and a coupon for a free car wash. It felt surreal. I hadn't set out to become the neighborhood hero. I just wanted my brisket weekend. But now I was part of something bigger. People were organizing, talking about revising HOA rules to prevent unchecked power like Karen had wielded. One guy suggested rotating board positions to avoid what he called dictator syndrome. I liked that term. It stuck. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a drink in hand, watching the sprinklers arc across the lawn. Across the street, Karen's porch light flicked on. Her silhouette appeared behind the curtain, pacing. She knew what was coming. Not just the loss of her position, but the shift in power, the unraveling of the fear she'd relied on. And for the first time since she'd stormed into my barbecue with her smug grin, she was the one trapped in the smell of her own decisions. The neighborhood had changed, and this time, she couldn't control the narrative. I wasn't done, though. Because somewhere in the mix of flyers and gossip and HOA drama, something else had caught my attention. Karen's use of HOA funds had always been a bit murky. The luau disaster last year, the wellness initiative that resulted in a single yoga mat in the clubhouse, the maintenance invoices that never seemed to match what actually got fixed. People had grumbled, but no one had looked deeper. I figured it was time someone did. Not out of spite. Out of principle. Karen had used her position to manipulate, deceive, and bully. But if there was more, if there was something truly illegal behind her actions, I intended to uncover it. I didn't know where the trail would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. The barbecue may have started as a joke, as a petty, smoky act of defiance. But now it was the catalyst for a reckoning. The community wasn't just watching anymore. They were participating. And if Karen thought the onions were the worst of it, she hadn't seen anything yet.